boarded the bus as students, but they came back marching like soldiers. What happened in that missing 60 minutes? The rain battered the asphalt of Oak Creek High's parking lot, a relentless gray curtain that turned the morning commute into a blurred mess of brake lights and umbrellas. Sarah stood under the concrete overhang of the main entrance, her coffee cup warming her hands, though her eyes remained cold and scanning. She checked her watch. 8:55 a.m. Bus 404 was 55 minutes late. Usually, the arrival of the buses was a chaotic symphony of shouting teenagers, slamming doors, and the screech of air brakes. But when the yellow behemoth finally turned the corner, lumbering through the sheets of rain, the atmosphere shifted. The bus moved sluggishly, heavy on its suspension. It hissed to a halt in the drop-off zone, but the doors didn't open immediately. Sarah narrowed her eyes. She wasn't just a history teacher. She was a woman who had spent a decade reading micro-expressions in high-stakes interrogation rooms before she retired to suburbia. Something was wrong. The windows were fogged up, hiding the interior. Finally, the hydraulic doors folded open. Normally, students would spill out like a bursting dam. Today, they filed out in single file. Silent. Heads down. 30 teenagers, soaking wet before they even stepped into the rain, marched toward the school entrance with the mechanical rhythm of soldiers. No laughter. No shoving. No headphones. Sarah stepped forward, intercepting the flow. She spotted Leo, a bright but anxious sophomore from her third-period class. His backpack hung off one shoulder, and his usually pristine sneakers were caked in reddish mud. "Leo," Sarah said, her voice soft but commanding. The boy flinched. He looked up, and for a split second, Sarah saw raw, unadulterated terror in his eyes. He opened his mouth, but his gaze darted to the bus driver, Mr. Henderson, who was staring straight ahead, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. "We got lost," Leo whispered, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "GPS glitch." He pushed past her, merging into the stream of silent students entering the building. Sarah didn't chase him. She looked at the bus. The digital route display on the side was flickering. She pulled out her phone and checked the district's transport app. For the last hour, Bus 404 hadn't just been late. According to the tracking data, it hadn't existed. The signal had been jammed. Sarah looked at the tires. Red clay. Thick, clumping red clay. There was no red clay in Oak Creek. The nearest deposit was the abandoned industrial sector, 10 miles off-route. As Mr. Henderson slammed the doors and gunned the engine to speed away, Sarah memorized the license plate, her heart rate steady, her mind sharpening. The history lesson could wait. The faculty lounge smelled of burnt coffee and damp wool. Sarah sat at her desk, grading papers, but her mind was replaying the morning's arrival. The silence of those 30 students was deafening. It wasn't just fear. It was conditioning. They looked like they had been sworn to secrecy under threat of something far worse than detention. "Did you hear about 404? Sarah didn't look up, but her ears tuned into the conversation by the kitchenette. It was Mrs. Gable, the school counselor, talking to Principal Vance. Vance was a man who cared more about test scores and funding grants than the actual welfare of the student body. He was wiping his glasses, looking agitated. "Technical error, Janet," Vance said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The GPS system went down due to the storm. The driver took a wrong turn. That's the official story. Do not stir up the parents." "But the kids," Gable pressed, sounding genuinely concerned. "3 of them came to my office. They didn't speak. They just sat there. They're teenagers. They're dramatic," Vance snapped. "I handled it. Drop it." Sarah marked a C on a paper about the Industrial Revolution, her hand steady. Handled it. The phrase triggered a memory of her past life, cleanup crews and redacted files. She waited until the bell rang and the lounge cleared out before she moved. She needed to see the security footage. The school had cameras covering the bus loop. Sarah walked down the hallway, blending in. She was the boring history teacher. Nobody looked at her twice. She slipped into the AV room during the passing period. The student tech, a kid named Marcus, was glued to his phone. "Marcus," Sarah said. He jumped. "I need a favor." I think a student dropped my gradebook near the bus loop this morning. Can we check the tape from 8:50 to 9 o'clock? Marcus shrugged. Sure, Ms. T. He typed on the keyboard. Camera 3 covers the loop. The screen flickered to life. The timestamp read 8:50 a.m. Rain fell. The pavement was empty. Then the time jumped. 8 hours 50 minutes and 5 seconds. 8 hours 50 minutes and 6 seconds. Barely a second later, the timestamp skipped to 9:10 a.m. Whoa, Marcus frowned. That's weird. Looks like a corrupted file. We lost 20 minutes of feed. Just a glitch? Sarah asked, leaning in, her eyes scanning the jagged pixels at the cut point. Must be. Storm messes with the Wi-Fi. It wasn't the storm. The footage hadn't been interrupted. It had been excised. Someone had scrubbed the arrival of bus 404 from the server. Sarah thanked Marcus and left. As she walked back to her classroom, she realized the glitch wasn't an accident. It was a cover-up. And whatever happened in that missing hour was something Principal Vance was desperate to hide. Part 3. Red Clay and Rust. By third period, the atmosphere in Sarah's classroom was suffocating. Leo sat in the back row, his eyes glued to the desk. He hadn't taken notes. He hadn't shifted in his seat. He looked like a statue carved from anxiety. Sarah taught the lesson on the Cold War, discussing propaganda and silence, letting the words hang heavy in the air, aimed directly at him. When the bell rang, she moved to the door, blocking the exit casually. Leo. A moment. The other students filed out. Leo stopped, gripping his backpack straps. He looked ready to bolt. I'm not asking you to snitch, Leo, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a register she rarely used in school. Calm, flat, dangerous. I'm telling you that I know the bus didn't just get lost. I saw the mud on your shoes. I saw the tires. Leo's breath hitched. Ms. Turner, please. I can't. Red Clay, Sarah said. That's the old quarry. Why was the bus at the quarry, Leo? Leo looked at the door, then back at her. His lip trembled. They took our phones. They put them in a bag. Then the driver. He didn't drive. A man in a suit got on. Sarah's internal alarms blared. Who was the man? I don't know. He had a tablet. He walked down the aisle and scanned us. Like products. He checked our eyes. He asked about our parents' jobs. Leo was shaking now. He told us that if we said anything, our college funds, our records, our parents' mortgages, everything would be erased. He knew everything about us, Ms. Turner. Did they hurt anyone? No. They just sorted us. They took 3 kids to the back of the bus for interviews. Then they let us go. Who were the 3 kids? The scholarship students, Leo whispered. The ones with no family in town. Sarah nodded slowly. Go to your next class, Leo. Act normal. You never spoke to me. Leo fled. Sarah stood alone in the empty classroom. This wasn't a kidnapping. It was an appraisal. Someone was auditing the student body for value. She walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot. The bus depot was across the district, but Mr. Henderson, the driver, usually took his lunch break at a diner on Main Street. She had a free period. It was time to pay Mr. Henderson a visit. She reached into her purse, passed the red grading pen, and touched the cold metal of the tactical flashlight she carried. A heavy, serrated tool that was more weapon than light. Old habits died hard. The diner was greasy, loud, and smelled of bacon grease. Mr. Henderson sat in a corner booth, hunched over a plate of untouched fries. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in a single morning. His uniform was rumpled, and he kept glancing at the door. Sarah didn't wave. She slid into the booth opposite him. Henderson jumped, spilling coffee onto the Formica table. Ms. Turner. He stammered. I'm on break. Cut the crap, Henderson, Sarah said. She didn't raise her voice, but she projected an intensity that made the heavy-set man shrink. I know about the quarry. I know about the man in the suit. I know you let them on the bus. Henderson's face went pale. "You don't understand. I had no choice. They have my pension. They have my record." "Who are they?" He looked around wildly, lowering his voice. "I don't know names. I get a text. A route update. It overrides the GPS. If I don't follow it, the bus shuts down remotely. They control the electronics, Sarah. Everything. Why the scholarship kids?" Sarah pressed, leaning in. "I don't know. I just drive." Henderson wiped sweat from his forehead. "They're looking for something specific. Genetics. IQ. I don't know. But this morning, it was different. They didn't just scan them. They took blood samples. From the 3 kids in the back." Sarah felt a chill. Blood samples? On a school bus. They called it a medical screening. Said it was for a new district health initiative. But the guy in the suit, he wasn't a doctor. He had a gun under his jacket. I saw the holster when he reached for the tablet. Henderson grabbed a napkin and scribbled something on it. He slid it across the table. "I'm quitting. Today. I'm moving to my sister's in Nevada. You should leave it alone, Ms. Turner. These people, they aren't the school board. They're contractors. Private sector." Sarah looked at the napkin. It was a sequence of numbers. 88-10 Alpha. "What is this?" "The code the suit used to unlock the secure compartment under the back seat," Henderson whispered. "He left something there. He said he'd pick it up tonight when the bus is in the yard. I'm not gonna be there." Henderson stood up, threw a $20 bill on the table, and walked out without looking back. Sarah pocketed the napkin. The bus yard was a fortress at night, fenced and patrolled. But Sarah knew how to breach fortresses. She finished Henderson's coffee. It was cold. Night fell quickly in November. The district bus yard was a sprawling lot of gravel and chain-link fencing, illuminated by buzzing sodium floodlights. Rows of yellow buses sat silent, like sleeping beasts. Sarah wore black, tactical cargo pants and a dark hoodie, a stark contrast to her cardigans and skirts. She parked her sedan 3 blocks away and approached the perimeter on foot. The security guard, an older man named Miller who usually slept through his shift, was surprisingly alert tonight. He was pacing near the gate, talking on a radio. Sarah bypassed the gate. She found a section of the fence near the mechanic's shed where the ground had eroded. She slipped under the chain link, the wet gravel crunching softly under her boots. She moved through the shadows, utilizing the buses as cover. She located bus 404. It was parked in the back row, darker than the others. She approached the rear emergency door. It was locked. She moved to the driver's side window, popped the latch with a Slim Jim tool she kept in her boot, and slid inside. The bus smelled of wet vinyl and teenage sweat. She moved to the back, counting the rows. The back seat. Henderson had said under the seat. She felt along the bottom cushion until her fingers brushed a keypad built into the metal frame. It was high-tech military grade, completely out of place on a public school bus. She punched in the code, 8-8-1-0A. A soft click echoed. A small panel slid open. Inside there was no money or drugs. There was a hard drive and a sealed vial of clear liquid. Sarah picked up the hard drive. It was labeled Project Incubator Oak Creek Cohort. Suddenly, a beam of light swept across the windows. A truck had pulled into the yard. Not a tow truck. A black SUV with tinted windows. Tires crunched on the gravel, stopping right next to bus 404. Sarah dropped to the floor. She heard heavy doors open. Voices. Driver said he left it. Check the compartment. And if he talked, then we scrub the driver. And anyone he spoke to. Sarah gripped the hard drive. She was trapped in a metal box with one exit, and the wolves were at the door. She checked her watch. She had maybe 30 seconds before they boarded. She looked at the emergency release lever. If she pulled it, the alarm would sound. It was her only distraction. The heavy footsteps on the bus stairs vibrated through the floor. Sarah lay flat under the seats in the midsection, holding her breath. Clear front, a voice barked. Professional. Concise. Check the back. As the footsteps advanced, Sarah made her move. She didn't wait to be found. She silently unlatched the emergency window exit above her. With a sudden burst of motion, she kicked the window out. The glass didn't shatter, it swung open on the hinge, but the noise was loud enough. Movement. Left side. Sarah vaulted out of the window, dropping 6 feet to the wet gravel. She rolled, coming up in a crouch behind the rear tire. Secure the perimeter. 2 men in tactical gear spilled out of the bus. Sarah didn't run away from them. She ran under the adjacent bus, crawling on her elbows and knees through the mud. It was a risky maneuver, but they expected her to flee toward the fence. She reached the edge of the row and saw the black SUV. The driver was waiting, engine idling. Sarah saw an opportunity. She grabbed a handful of gravel and threw it hard against the metal siding of a bus 3 rows over. Clang. The men spun toward the noise. Over there. Sarah bolted in the opposite direction, sprinting toward the mechanic's shed. She needed a vehicle or a weapon. She burst into the shed. It was empty of people, but full of tools. She grabbed a heavy wrench. The radio on the workbench crackled. Unit 1 to base. We have a breach. The package is gone. Lock it down, a distorted voice replied. Release the dogs. Dogs. Sarah cursed. She scanned the shed. There was a service door in the back. She kicked it open and found herself facing the woods that bordered the school property. She ran. Behind her, the baying of German shepherds began to rise over the sound of the rain. She had the hard drive. She had the evidence. But as she crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping her face, she realized the terrifying truth. This wasn't just a private company. The gear, the protocol, the dogs, this was a paramilitary operation. And it was happening on American soil, using children as the raw material. Sarah made it to her car, mud-soaked and gasping, but she didn't go home. Her apartment would be the first place they looked. She drove to a 24-hour internet cafe 3 towns over, a dingy place filled with gamers and truckers. She sat in the back corner, hood up, and plugged the hard drive into a burner laptop she kept in her trunk for emergencies she hoped would never happen. The drive was encrypted, heavily, but Sarah knew the architecture. It was NSA derivative code. Come on, she whispered, her fingers flying across the keys. She used a brute force backdoor script she had written years ago. The screen flashed green. Access granted. Files populated the screen. Photos. Hundreds of them. They were student profiles. Not just from Oak Creek, but from schools across the state. Each profile had medical data, IQ scores, and something called psychological compliance rating. She found Leo's file. Asterisk status. Rejected. High intelligence, low compliance. Liability. Asterisk she found the scholarship students. Asterisk status. Accepted. High intelligence, orphans/low income. Ideal candidates for Phase 2. Asterisk she opened a video file labeled The Pitch. It was a recording of a boardroom meeting. Principal Vance was there, looking nervous, shaking hands with a woman in a sharp suit. The bus routes give us perfectly isolated windows of time, the woman explained. We can screen, condition, and filter the candidates without parental interference. The incubator program will provide the agency with assets that have no paper trail. By the time they graduate, they won't be students. They'll be operatives. Sarah froze. They were recruiting child soldiers. Spies. Using the public school system as a farm. The missing hour was an indoctrination session. Suddenly, a face popped up on the cafe's TV news ticker. Breaking news. Manhunt underway for dangerous fugitive. Sarah looked up. Her driver's license photo was on the screen. Sarah Turner, a history teacher at Oak Creek High, is wanted for the murder of school bus driver Thomas Henderson. Henderson was found dead in his home this evening. They had cleaned up the loose end. And they had framed her. Sarah slammed the laptop shut. Every eye in the cafe was glued to the screens. She stood up slowly, leaving the laptop behind. She had the drive in her pocket. She had to move. Sarah needed an ally, but everyone was a potential enemy. She couldn't go to the police. The agency clearly had reach. She thought of the only person who had seemed genuinely concerned in the faculty lounge. Mrs. Gable. It was a risk, but Sarah was out of options. She ditched her car in a mall parking lot and hot-wired an old pickup truck. She drove to Mrs. Gable's house, a quiet suburban bungalow. She broke in through the back door. The house was dark. Sarah moved through the kitchen, knife in hand. She heard voices in the living room. She has the drive. We need to locate her before she uploads it. It was Principal Vance's voice. She's smart, a woman's voice replied. It was Mrs. Gable. But the warmth was gone from her tone. It was cold, clinical. Her personnel file from her previous life is redacted. But I pulled the hard copies. She was DA. Asset protection. We underestimated the history teacher. Sarah froze in the hallway. Gable wasn't an ally. She was the handler. The children are ready for transport tonight, Gable continued. We're moving the accepted candidates to the facility. Use the emergency evacuation drill as cover. Bus 404 will take them. And the parents? Vance asked. They'll be told it's a quarantine. By the time they realize their kids are gone, the subjects will be in international waters. Sarah's grip tightened on the knife. Tonight. They were taking the kids tonight. She stepped back, the floorboard creaking. Sure, Gable hissed. Did you hear that? Sarah didn't wait. She retreated to the kitchen, grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove, and threw it through the sliding glass door. Crash! As Vance and Gable ran toward the noise, Sarah bolted out the front door, sprinting for the stolen truck. She didn't need to fight them here. She needed to stop that bus. The school was lit up like a Christmas tree. Police cars, ambulances, and fire trucks surrounded the perimeter. The emergency evacuation was in full swing. A gas leak simulation. Perfect cover. Sarah parked the truck in the woods and moved toward the bus loop. The rain had returned. Harder than before. She watched from the tree line. Parents were being held back at the gates. Students were being loaded onto buses. She saw bus 404. It was idling at the far end of the loop, away from the chaos. A group of 10 students, the accepted, were being led toward it by men in hazmat suits. They weren't hazmat teams. They were the tactical crew from the yard. Mrs. Gable stood by the door of the bus, checking a clipboard. Sarah checked her gear. She had the knife, the tactical flashlight, and a flare gun she had found in the truck's emergency kit. It wasn't enough. But she had something else. Knowledge of the terrain. She sprinted toward the school's generator shed. If she killed the power, the chaos would triple. The police would move in. The extraction would be botched. She kicked the door of the shed. Locked. She used the flare gun, firing a round directly at the lock. The magnesium burned through the mechanism. She kicked it open. Inside, the hum of high-voltage transformers filled the air. Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed a metal shovel from the wall and jammed it into the main circuit breaker. Boom. Sparks showered down like fireworks. The school went black. The floodlights died. The perimeter plunged into darkness. Screams erupted from the crowd. In the confusion, Sarah ran toward bus 404. The tactical team was disoriented, their night vision goggles flaring out from the sudden change in light. Sarah tackled the nearest guard, taking his pistol before he hit the ground. She stood before the bus door. Mrs. Gable spun around, pulling a small weapon. "Class is dismissed," Sarah said. She fired a warning shot into the air. "Get the kids off the bus. Now." The chaos was absolute. The police, realizing the gas leak was a sham and hearing gunfire, breached the perimeter. The tactical team, realizing their cover was blown, abandoned the students and scrambled for their SUVs. Mrs. Gable looked at Sarah, hatred burning in her eyes. "You have no idea what you've done. You've set progress back 20 years. I flunked you," Sarah said, stepping forward. Gable dropped her weapon and raised her hands as police floodlights swept over them. Sarah ushered the terrified students off the bus. Leo was among them. He looked at Sarah, muddy, holding a gun, bleeding from a cut on her forehead, and he nodded. A silent thank you. Sarah slipped away before the police could cuff her. She vanished into the woods as the parents broke through the barricades to reclaim their children. 1 week later, Sarah sat in a diner 3 states away. Her hair was dyed black, cut short. She watched the news on the overhead TV. The scandal was massive. The Oak Creek conspiracy. Principal Vance and Mrs. Gable were in federal custody. The private military firm Aegis Corp was being dismantled. The missing hour had become a national story. Sarah took a sip of her coffee. Her phone buzzed. A burner. She picked it up. "It's done," Sarah said. "Good work, Agent Turner," a distorted voice replied. "The network has been exposed. But we found something in the files you recovered." "What?" "The incubator program wasn't just recruiting," the voice said. "It was searching. They were looking for a specific genetic marker. A marker that matches you." Sarah froze. "They weren't building an army, Sarah. They were trying to replicate the serum they gave you 10 years ago. They know you're alive. And now they know you're active." Sarah hung up. She looked out the window. A black sedan was parked across the street. The driver was watching her. Sarah smiled, a cold, predatory smile. She picked up her knife from the table. "Let them come," she whispered. "I'm just getting started."